Every man must learn to look beyond the surface. You see, most people, especially men, get caught up in the outer world, the behaviors, the curves, the voice, the actions, and the experiences that seem pleasurable in the moment. But those who lead their lives based on surface interpretations are always at the mercy of manipulation. When a woman shows you her sexual preferences, especially bold, aggressive, or dominant positions, it's not just about what feels good. It's about what she's expressing and, more importantly, what she's hiding. You must learn to read the signal behind the style, because patterns always matter more than pleasure. Now, I'm not saying sex is bad. I'm not saying dominance is wrong. I'm saying that sex, like every other form of human behavior, is symbolic. It's communication in its rawest form, and if you're not paying attention to what it's saying, you'll end up in confusion, shame, regret, and weakness. Most men have been trained to shut up and accept whatever comes their way, especially if she's hot, especially if she's freaky, especially if she's confident. They confuse sexual openness with emotional safety. They think, if she's into me like that, then I must be special. No, you're not special. You're just the next guy in her cycle, unless you stop and observe her patterns. A woman who insists on sexual positions that give her full power, where you are passive, where she's fully in control, might be revealing more than her fantasy. She might be showing you how she treats relationships, how she views intimacy, how she sees men. Some women use sex to dominate because it's the only way they feel in control. They don't want to submit, not because they're powerful, but because they're deeply afraid of surrender, of being hurt, of being seen, so they dominate, and they use their body to create distance while pretending it's closeness. You must not fall for that illusion. It's very easy to be deceived when the lights are low and the blood is rushing. But the man who leads his life by sexual validation will always be a slave to the moment. What you need is discipline, not in the boring, restricted sense, but in the kingly sense. You observe before you indulge. You listen before you lead. You study her behavior as if it were a map, because that's what it is. You are not there to react to what she likes. You are there to understand what her likes mean, because that's where your power lies. The way a woman behaves during sex tells you where her soul sits. Does she crave chaos? Does she need to degrade you to feel alive? Does she only come alive when she's in charge? That's not sexy. That's survival. And if you don't pay attention, you'll mistake trauma for confidence. The man who knows himself doesn't chase experience. He filters it. He doesn't say yes because it feels good. He says yes because it aligns with who he is. And most men have no idea who they are, so they're constantly trying to find meaning in how a woman treats them. That is dangerous. That is how kings are turned into clowns. You see, the man who notices patterns begins to detach from the temporary and tune into the eternal. If you always feel disrespected after certain types of intimacy, ask why. Don't blame her. Don't blame yourself. Just study the cause. Was she trying to create connection, or was she trying to prove dominance? Was she giving herself to you, or was she using your body to escape her reality? Was it intimacy, or was it control disguised as chemistry? These questions aren't fun, but they're necessary, because too many men wake up next to women who felt good at night but feel like confusion in the morning. That is not a mistake, that's a pattern you failed to see because you were too busy reacting to what was happening rather than interpreting it, and the interpretation comes from internal stillness. You must stop needing women to validate your worth. You must stop using their moans as your mirror. You must stop treating sexual attention as proof of your importance. Once you detach from that hunger, you gain vision. You start seeing what other men are blind to. You start noticing how some women use their sexuality like a weapon, not because they're evil, but because they're unhealed. You start to feel the shift in energy, the emotional manipulation that hides underneath the thrill, and you don't fall for it. You acknowledge it, you study it, and then you decide if she aligns with who you are. That is masculine control, not of her body, but of your own awareness. The mistake most men make is trying to match the energy of the woman instead of grounding themselves in their own. So when she becomes aggressive, they become submissive. When she becomes controlling, they become weak. When she acts wild, they pretend to love it. just to keep her. But the man who sees the pattern doesn't get caught in the game. He knows that not all sexual confidence is real confidence. He knows that some women crave domination in bed because they're afraid to let a real man lead. He doesn't judge her, but he doesn't blindly trust her either. Because trust is not given based on performance, trust is earned based on patterns. Insecurity is not something you're born with, it's something you've been trained to believe. Over time, it becomes a story you repeat so often that you no longer recognize it's false. You begin to live inside that lie. You act out the role of a man who doubts himself, who overthinks every interaction, who watches every woman's expression like a test, waiting for approval, hoping for permission to feel worthy. But here's the truth, that insecurity you feel, it didn't come from her. It didn't come from women at all. It came from the moment you started measuring yourself against a standard that was never yours to begin with. Most men experience rejection at some point, whether it's from a woman, a father, a teacher, or society, and they never really recover. They just suppress it. They hide it under ambition, under silence, under bravado. But it leaks. It leaks in their relationships, in their need to be liked, in their fear of being left, in their constant need to perform for validation. And when a woman walks into their life who seems too confident, too bold, too sexually assertive, that suppressed insecurity wakes up. Suddenly, they don't feel in control. They feel exposed. And instead of facing the wound, they project it. They assume she's dangerous, untrustworthy, manipulative, not because she is, but because she triggers what they've never dealt with inside themselves. The truth is, women are not your enemy, but they do mirror you. They reflect back what you carry. If you walk into intimacy with fear, with doubt, with a fractured self-image, the connection becomes a spotlight, not a sanctuary. Everything you haven't healed will rise to the surface, and if you're not prepared, you'll mistake that reflection for a threat. You'll start seeing women as the problem when in reality, they're just exposing your problem. And this is where most men collapse. Instead of doing the internal work to understand the roots of their insecurity, they try to control the external environment. They try to tame the woman, to change her, to shrink her energy so they don't feel overwhelmed. But that's not leadership. That's fear disguised as authority. Your insecurity, if left unchecked, will convince you that every confident woman is a threat, that every dominant act is disrespect, that every bold choice is rebellion. But none of that is truth. It's just your shadow talking. It's the part of you that hasn't learned how to stand in your worth without needing reassurance, because real confidence, real masculine confidence, is silent, still, grounded. It doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need to perform, and most importantly, it doesn't crumble when challenged. But to get there, you have to confront the lie you've been living. You see, that feeling of not being enough. It wasn't born in the bedroom, it was born long before that. Maybe you were compared to others. Maybe you were made to feel weak. Maybe your wins were ignored and your losses magnified. Whatever it was, it planted a seed. And instead of uprooting it, you watered it with overthinking, with anxiety, with self-doubt, and then you grew into a man who looks strong but feels fragile. That's why her confidence shakes you. That's why her sexual dominance makes you feel small. Not because she's doing something wrong, but because you've allowed her energy to activate your weakness, and you can't change what you won't confront. So stop blaming her. Stop pointing at her choices as if they're the root of your pain. Your healing doesn't begin when she changes. It begins when you do. When you stop letting every strong woman intimidate you. When you stop needing approval to feel like a man. When you stop confusing physical attraction for emotional safety. And this transformation starts in silence, in solitude, in deep reflection. It starts when you become brutally honest with yourself about what you've allowed, what you've tolerated, and what you've avoided. Insecurity will ruin your destiny if you let it. It will convince you to chase women who don't respect you and fear women who challenge you. It will have you bouncing between seeking approval and resenting the one you're trying to impress. That's not love. That's addiction to validation, and if you want to be free, you must rewire your mind. You must begin to see yourself as already worthy, before the woman, before the sex, before the relationship. You must become the source of your own confidence, not a collector of it, because no woman, no matter how nurturing or loving, can compensate for the work you refuse to do on yourself. And once you begin this work, everything shifts. You stop getting triggered by dominance. You stop reading too much into her preferences. You stop obsessing over being enough, because you realize you've always been enough. You were just conditioned to forget it. You realize that the only thing standing between you and power was the belief that you had none. And the moment you stop negotiating with your insecurity, the moment you stop asking for permission to feel whole, is the moment your life starts moving in a new direction. Not because women change, but because your response to them does. And that response is everything. The real battle is not with women. It's not with what they like, what they say, or what they want in the bedroom. The battle is with fear. Your fear, and fear wears many faces. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like jealousy. Sometimes it looks like disgust. But at its core, it's always the same: fear of losing control, fear of not being enough, fear of being dominated, exposed, discarded. And that fear makes you interpret female sexual expression as a threat. You confuse confidence with danger. You see boldness and think betrayal is coming. You watch her take control and assume it's a red flag, not realizing the only thing screaming inside you is your own wounded masculinity. Sexual expression is not the enemy. The real enemy is the internal panic that rises up when a woman steps into her power. You've been told that a woman who enjoys herself too much in bed, who initiates, who demands, who guides, who speaks her mind during intimacy, is somehow untrustworthy. You've been trained to believe that if she's not submissive, she's suspicious, and that training has nothing to do with truth. It has everything to do with unhealed emotion. What you feel during sex is not just desire. It's also your history, your shame, your beliefs, and your unspoken questions rising to the surface. Sex is not just physical, it's deeply psychological, and until you face your own fear, you will never experience intimacy as it's meant to be. When you fear dominance, you become suspicious of expression. You think a woman's passion is proof of her potential to cheat. You see her confidence as proof of her detachment, but let's be real, that's not logic. That's protection. You're trying to guard yourself from being hurt. You're creating mental alarms to justify pulling back emotionally. You're not responding to her behavior. You're reacting to your internal instability. Because the man who is secure in himself doesn't flinch when a woman takes the lead. He doesn't panic when she's vocal, bold, or commanding in bed. He evaluates her based on consistency, character, presence, not just on performance. But when you're afraid, every move she makes becomes a red flag, and what's worse, you start misreading desire as danger. So instead of enjoying the moment, you're on edge. Instead of leading the experience, you're overanalyzing it. Instead of building trust, you're building suspicion, and that suspicion isn't even about her. It's about what you haven't resolved inside yourself. You might think you're protecting yourself by distrusting her, but what you're really doing is imprisoning yourself in your own assumptions. Now, let's talk about control. Many men are obsessed with it. They think to be masculine is to control everything, including sex, but real masculinity isn't about controlling her, it's about controlling yourself. Your mind, your emotions, your interpretation. If you lose your center the moment she takes charge in bed, you were never in control to begin with. You were performing strength, not embodying it. You were faking security, not living it. And that's why her expression shakes you, because it exposes the gap between who you pretend to be and who you really are when you're vulnerable. Let's be clear, not every woman who's dominant in bed is disloyal. Not every sexually expressive woman is dangerous. Some women are just in tune with themselves. They're not ashamed of what they want. They're not afraid of intensity. They're not playing games. They are just present. And your fear turns that presence into a problem. Because when you're insecure, you don't know how to receive energy. You only know how to compete with it. So you start battling her, trying to shut her down, trying to bring her down to your level of comfort instead of rising to meet her in truth. That's not strength, that's retreat in disguise. What you fear in her is often what you're missing in yourself. Her sexual power makes you feel weak because you've never claimed your own. Her confidence makes you uncomfortable because yours is borrowed, not built. Her dominance threatens you because you're still looking for permission to lead. And when you don't feel like a man, her being fully in her feminine makes you feel exposed. It reminds you that you've still got work to do. And instead of facing that, you call her toxic, manipulative, dangerous. But what if she's not the threat? What if she's the mirror? What if every reaction you're having is a lesson? What if your discomfort is the signal that your identity is too fragile, too dependent on being in control, too untested by real emotional intimacy, because you can't lead a woman you fear? You can't guide her if her expression shakes your foundation. You can't build with someone if her pleasure makes you question your position. Sex is not about winning or losing. It's about connection. It's about depth. And until you stop seeing sexual dominance as competition, you'll never experience the real joy of being with a powerful woman. Her power doesn't diminish yours, it reveals yours, but only if you're willing to confront what her energy activates in you. And that takes courage, not in the bedroom, but in your own mind, in your past, in your patterns. Because until you stop seeing bold women as a risk, you'll never let them close enough to love you. You'll keep punishing her for your fear. You'll keep sabotaging intimacy to avoid vulnerability. And you'll keep confusing fear with facts, thinking you're being wise when you're actually just afraid. Jealousy is not the enemy, it's a messenger. It's a reaction that rises when something deep inside you feels threatened. Most men try to deny it. They hide it behind jokes, behind arrogance, behind fake indifference. But the truth is, jealousy is often a sign that your emotional foundation isn't as strong as you pretend it is. And when you're with a woman who carries herself with power, who knows what she wants, who expresses herself without apology, that jealousy doesn't hide, it explodes. You start second guessing everything. Her words, her actions, her desires. You turn her sexual preferences into evidence of potential betrayal because you haven't yet learned how to judge character without letting your fear write the script. This is where most men go wrong. They confuse emotional reactivity with wisdom. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't make it truth. Feeling suspicious doesn't mean she's guilty. Feeling insecure doesn't mean she's wrong. Feeling jealous doesn't mean she's doing anything disrespectful. But if you don't understand the mechanics of your own emotion, you'll start believing that your pain is always coming from the outside. And that belief will destroy your ability to think clearly. It will distort your perception, and worst of all, it will blind you to the real indicators of character, the ones that have nothing to do with what she enjoys in the bedroom and everything to do with how she lives outside of it. Sexual expression is not a full picture of someone's integrity. A woman may love dominance, may love power play, may love switching control in bed. That's not a red flag by itself. What matters is how she behaves when the moment is over. Is she loyal? Is she honest when no one's watching? Does she lie to feel safe? Does she respect your time, your energy, your presence? That's where the truth is. And until you learn to look there, you will always confuse performance with personality. You'll make her physical confidence the measure of her trustworthiness, and that's a tragic mistake, because it makes you reactive, not intentional, defensive, not discerning. You must stop trying to analyze her morality based on what turns her on. Stop reducing her entire identity to her kink, her moves, her vocal tone in bed. There are women who moan like goddesses at night, but move like ghosts in the morning. And there are women who seem wild in bed, but deeply respect the man they're with, honor their relationship, and protect the connection with loyalty and consistency. But you can't see that if you're too busy trying to decode her pleasure instead of observing her patterns. That's where real power lies, not in reacting, but in watching, learning, judging her character based on what matters. Here's the problem: jealousy is seductive. It makes you feel alert, aware, sharp. It gives you the illusion that you're protecting yourself when really you're just feeding insecurity. And when jealousy is left unchecked, it turns into paranoia. You start assigning meaning to things that mean nothing. You start twisting her actions into narratives that fit your fear, and in doing that, you stop being present, you stop enjoying the moment, you stop leading with clarity, because a jealous mind is a distracted mind. And a distracted man cannot lead, cannot build, cannot trust, and ultimately cannot keep anything real. The solution is not to suppress jealousy, it's to transform it. You must take that raw emotional energy and use it to fuel your discernment. Not suspicion, discernment. Start watching how she handles conflict. Watch how she treats people she doesn't need. Observe how consistent she is with her words and actions. That's where trust is built. Not in the bedroom, but in the everyday. You're not looking for perfection. You're looking for alignment, and that can't be measured by how submissive or dominant she is during sex. It can only be measured by how rooted she is in who she claims to be. When you operate from discernment instead of jealousy, everything changes. You stop obsessing over what she does in bed and start paying attention to who she becomes in life. You're no longer rattled by her boldness. You're intrigued by her principles. You don't need her to be small to feel big. You don't need her to dim her light to feel secure, because you've developed the emotional strength to stand beside her without fear of losing yourself. That's the difference between a man who reacts and a man who leads. One is ruled by emotion, the other is ruled by vision, but that shift doesn't happen by accident. It takes work. You have to confront your emotional habits, your past betrayals, your personal insecurities. You have to ask yourself hard questions. Are you judging her, or are you projecting onto her? Are you watching her, or are you reading her through the lens of your past pain? Are you present with her, or are you just waiting for proof that your fears are valid? That inner work is what separates boys from men, because boys chase comfort, but men build clarity, and clarity lets you see people as they are, not as your trauma paints them. Judgment rooted in fear is blindness. But judgment rooted in truth is power. And when you learn to shift from jealousy into judgment, when you start evaluating character instead of reacting to triggers, you unlock a new level of strength, not just in relationships, but in yourself. Because now, you're not moved by the surface, you're not shaken by confidence, you're not afraid of expression, you're grounded in who you are, and that foundation allows you to see clearly, lead wisely, and protect your peace without control, without fear, without self-sabotage. You were not born to chase, to beg, or to doubt your value in the presence of a woman's desires. You were born to lead, to stand in truth, to know who you are so deeply that no position she prefers, no fantasy she confesses, no performance she brings to the bedroom can shake your foundation. Yet most men hand over their confidence the moment they are sexually desired. They confuse attention for respect. They think validation equals value, and so they bend, they adapt. They silence their standards to keep a connection that's built on fear of being alone, not strength of self-worth. That is not power. That is self-abandonment wrapped in the illusion of intimacy. When a man doesn't know his worth, he gives power to what he doesn't understand. So when a woman shows up with sexual dominance or explores fantasies that feel unfamiliar or intense, he assumes it's dangerous. He reads discomfort as disrespect. He interprets unfamiliarity as untrustworthiness. Why? Because he's reacting, not deciding. A man who hasn't mastered his identity doesn't know how to navigate feminine energy when it's strong, expressive, and raw. He only feels secure when he can control the environment, and the moment that control is challenged, he starts crumbling from the inside out. You are not at the mercy of any woman's sexual preferences. Let that truth settle deep. Her desires are not your assignment to fulfill at the cost of your own integrity. Just because she wants something doesn't mean you are required to give it. Just because she expresses power doesn't mean she's worthy of access. A man who knows himself doesn't move out of fear or arousal or desperation. He moves with clarity. He evaluates the woman, not just based on how she performs, but how she lives. He asks, is she aligned with the type of energy I want in my life? Does her power come from healing or from hidden wounds? Does she express from wholeness or from chaos? And he decides, without explanation, without apology. When a man reclaims the throne of his masculinity, everything changes. He no longer sees bold sexual behavior as an invitation or a threat. He sees it as information, information that helps him filter, He's not trying to control her, shame her, or fix her. He's observing, discerning, and when something doesn't align, he walks away, not because he's afraid, but because he respects himself too much to stay where his soul doesn't feel safe. That's not weakness, that's power. That's leadership. That's the kind of presence women actually trust, even if they test it first. But the average man has been conditioned to seek worth through access. The more women he can please, the more accepted he feels. The more sexual acts he allows, even if they go against his boundaries, the more he believes he's desirable. That kind of thinking is broken. It keeps you in cycles where you sacrifice your self-respect for validation, where you let the loudest desires override your deepest values, where you abandon your standards just to avoid the discomfort of rejection. But every time you say yes to what doesn't feel right, you say no to your growth. There's nothing wrong with a woman expressing herself sexually, but your role is not to submit to her desires just because they're loud. Your role is to weigh those desires against your purpose, your values, your direction in life. Does her energy support you or drain you? Does she help sharpen your focus or create emotional confusion? Does her presence bring order or introduce chaos? These are the questions a man who sits on his inner throne asks. Because he knows sex is not just about bodies. It's about energy exchange, about influence, about power dynamics. And if you enter that space unaware, you leave it unanchored. The man who's reclaimed his throne also understands that rejection is not loss, it's redirection. He doesn't hold on to a woman who's not right for him out of scarcity. He doesn't fear walking away from pleasure that doesn't serve his peace. He trusts that alignment matters more than intensity, that long-term respect will always outweigh short-term excitement. And so he lives from a place of intentionality. He speaks with authority, not aggression. He moves with certainty, not arrogance. He guards his spirit not from women, but from being shaped by anything that doesn't reflect his truth. Too many men give up that throne the moment they're touched, kissed, seduced. They forget who they are. They allow chemistry to override clarity. They enter situations they don't fully agree with just to keep a woman interested. But any intimacy that requires you to betray yourself is not intimacy. It's abandonment disguised as connection. A king does not kneel to be loved. He doesn't shrink to be accepted. He doesn't perform to be chosen. He stands rooted in who he is and trusts that the right woman will not fear his standards. She will respect them. And when he meets a woman who carries sexual boldness, he doesn't rush to judgment, but he doesn't abandon discernment either. He listens, watches, analyzes. If it aligns, he builds. If it doesn't, he releases. That's what it means to rule over yourself, to be unmoved by emotion, to be untamed by pleasure, to be in control, not of her, but of your own energy. That is where real masculine confidence lives, not in domination, not in submission, but in decision. The decision to no longer live as a reaction to feminine energy, but as the calm, centered force that sets the standard.